燃え上がれガンダム。Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, a special podcast miniseries brought to you by the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am your host, Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are on this podcast going to take a deep dive into the wild and wacky and wonderful world of Universal Century Gundam by watching through the original Mobile Suit Gundam, sometimes called Gundam 0079. I am a experienced Gundam veteran, but you, Jonathan, you are not.
I am a Gundam virgin.
Yes, and we have broken that virginity now. This is a weird metaphor to go on, but this is what we're going with.
Okay, I think you made it weird.
You started it, and I've been watching Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones is weird with that shit. But yeah, no, we are here to talk about Gundam. This is something I've wanted to do for a very, very long time, and I've been slowly sort of putting the needles in your head of like, watch Gundam, Jonathan, watch Gundam, and finally you decided, yeah, fuck it, it's time to watch Gundam, and you watched it.
I did. Oh, well, not the whole thing.
Not the whole thing, no.
Should you tell the people about the project?
Yes. So this is sort of for people who have listened to like our Doctor Who, kind of Doctor Who 101. I forget what we called that podcast, but the classic Doctor Who rewatch. It's sort of the same thing. This is going to be a mini-series we're going to do alongside our normal Weekly Stuff podcast, where I have broken Mobile Suit Gundam down into 4 parts, technically, I guess 5 parts if you include this episode. So it'll be 5 episodes, and we'll tell you each time which episodes we're going to be going on to for the next set, so you can watch those. Since I have seen the whole series, I just kind of looked at it and decided, this looks like a good stretch of episodes. This is a good stretch of episodes. So they're not all even. In fact, the last one I think is just 5 because a lot of shit happens in the last 5 episodes of Gundam.
A lot of shit happens in the first 2 episodes of Gundam.
Yes. So, yeah. So that's kind of the way that we'll be doing it. Because we kind of talked a little bit about what would be the best way to do this series. And I think it would be too hard to just try to pack all 43 episodes into one podcast discussion on like the Weekly Stuff podcast. So instead, we're breaking this out and making its own thing.
It's summer. It's, we have free time.
Yes.
This is when we like to do this kind of thing. And yeah, so there will be 5 episodes of Weekly Suit Gundam for the whole original series. And then, hey, if we're having a lot of fun, I've heard there's more.
There's definitely more. Yeah, so what we're going to do for this episode is we're going to, at the end, we're going to talk about episodes 1 and 2. So you watched episodes 1 and 2 of Mobile Suit Gundam this morning. But before we get into all of that, I'm going to, being the Gundam veteran and someone who's been obsessed with Gundam for like 4 years now at this point, I'm going to sort of lay out some of there's kind of 3 things I want to do. I want to cover what is our history with mecha anime and kind of coming into it. What do we bring into it? And what did I bring into it? And my whole history with how the fuck I got to this point with Gundam, because it's a recent thing for me. I also want to cover what is Gundam as a franchise, because this is another reason why it's good to be doing this podcast now, Jonathan, is that this is actually the 40-year anniversary of Gundam as a franchise.
It is, because the original series is 1979.
Yes, the original series came out in 1979. This is 2019, so 40-year anniversary. They're doing a lot of fun Gundam stuff for the 40-year anniversary. They're making movies and stuff. So I want to kind of cover that franchise, because any franchise that's been going for 40 years, I think most people, like I was on the outside, are very intimidated by it. So I kind of want to break down what the fuck is Gundam. And then the last thing I want to cover before we go into the episodes is what is the historical context that came about to make Mobile Suit Gundam, because the story is pretty interesting, and Mobile Suit Gundam is not just like a really great anime series, but it's also historically one of the most important animes and most influential anime series ever made. So kind of get into some of that history of that. And so that's why we're only talking about 2 episodes of the show this time, is so that we can kind of cover all of that pre-existing information in one episode.
Absolutely. And I'll say, having watched the first 2 episodes today, that's more than enough for a podcast on its fucking own, because those are 2 really good... That's about as good a start as I've ever seen an anime make.
Yeah, so that, do you have anything else you want to say about just first impressions of the first 2 episodes before we get into the rest of the stuff?
It's really good. I mean, if I will say this, if you want to follow along with our project and you, like me, were maybe intimidated by this is a big show with... I mean, the original series is only 43 episodes, but obviously it has been going for 40 years now in various forms. It is very accessible to just sit down and watch the first 2. You don't need to know anything going in, because it was just the beginning. This didn't start with a 30-year manga series or something. And yeah, they're just it's about, as I said, it's about as good and confident a start. It is ridiculously well animated. There's a lot of series. Obviously, when you watch anime, you are kind of prepared for the ups and downs of animation quality. These 2 at least are very high up.
Obviously it will fluctuate as it goes on, as Weekly Anime does. But yeah, they start off really strong. Yeah, and just the character designs, it's all very striking. You can immediately start listing in your head all the things that have been influenced by this, because, even if you've never watched anime, you have seen the influences of Gundam. And that's all really cool, but it really works on its own. I really enjoyed the characters right off the bat. And yeah, I mean, 2 episodes is usually not enough, I would say, for a lot of anime to get a taste for it. This is one where I'm like, okay, I know I like this, and I know I want to watch more, and I'm not sure what the ultimate story direction will be, but I know what it is now, and it's really good and fun to watch. So again, if you're not watching it, I would recommend watching along. We're watching on the recent Blu-ray release they did, which was a really nice top to bottom restoration of the series, and it is that beautiful, crisp 70s look where it's not too angular. There's a lot of nice round edges. It's where you can still see a lot of the Disney influence in anime, because it's from that kind of earlier period, for sure.
Yes, it is. It is definitely between 60s, where anime is a lot of Disney stuff, and the 80s, when it really comes into its own style, I think.
Yeah.
And so tail end of the 70s, and it's just a beautiful Blu-ray with nice grain structure intact and colors and everything. Sounds good. I'm having fun. Got to meet your buddy Char, who we know as the voice of Shido in Persona 5, which you went on a whole tangent about that.
Now Jonathan, you can go back and re-listen to whichever episode that was of our Persona 5 podcast and figure out why I was so giddy about when you see his palace design, because it's very good.
Yes. So, yeah, that's my opening salvo. Do we want to tell the listeners you have a Gundam model sitting here on the table?
Yes. So yeah, I guess that'll be a way to transition for me, because I do kind of want to... Because I've never really told the story on the podcast of how... I don't think I've ever really told you the whole process of how I got into Gundam.
One day you were just like, I'm playing this Gundam game.
Yes.
And it's on my top 10 games of the year list randomly, and I'm like, Sean, I didn't even know you were into Gundam. And you're like, I'm really into Gundam, Jonathan.
Yeah, so that was... Yeah, so the first time, for people listening to the Weekly Stuff podcast, the first time it would have happened was our end of the year podcast for 2016, which is when I just sort of sprung out that I have my number 10 game of that year was Gundam Breaker 3. Still stand by that. It's a good fucking game. And yeah, because it was something that I had just been kind of... It was one of those things where I didn't know when or how to tell anybody that I just started watching all of Gundam. So it's like, I'm just doing this. And so yeah, so I guess the full story goes back to... way back to childhood with the Toonami stuff, because as we talked about on the Weekly Stuff podcast, when we talked about Dragon Ball, that was a big part of my childhood, was watching anime on Toonami, and it was mostly stuff like Dragon Ball and Yu Yu Hakusho. But of course, one of the other really popular shows from that period was Gundam Wing. But I hated Gundam Wing, and I never could get into it, and that experience had pushed me so far away from mecha anime that even when I started to get back into anime proper, once we did started learning Japanese and stuff, I had always just had this impression of mecha anime is like Gundam Wing, it's dumb, I don't get it. I don't get why you'd want to see 2 people in giant robots fight each other when you could just see 2 superpowered people fight each other in Dragon Ball. It just, the concept didn't make sense to me. And I didn't realize until I did all this shit that Gundam Wing, one, Gundam Wing is only good if you're like 15 and watching it. And when I watched it the first time, I was like 11. Then when I watched it the second time, I was like 24. So I was on the wrong side of both ends of Gundam Wing. So Gundam Wing, I just don't think is that good of a show, and is certainly not representative of Gundam as a whole.
Which one is Gundam Wing? Is that from that era, the 2000s?
It's from it's like a 90s. It's 90s as fuck. Gundam Wing is very, very 90s. Yeah, so and I'll get into what the fuck is Gundam, like what the fuck is all that shit in Gundam, because there are so many shows it can get confusing. But so how I ended up actually getting into Gundam from that like kind of off experience of I don't really like Gundam Wing was when I was taking the third year Japanese classes at Boulder. One of the other students in the class that I just like happened to sit next to was super into mecha stuff and like especially Gundam. And they would just talk to me about it all the time of like whatever the fuck was going on. I think it was right around when Iron-Blooded Orphans, which is one of the more recent shows, started airing. It's on Crunchyroll, and that guy was just talking about it all the time. And then it was also at the same time I was listening to game critic Austin Walker. I think he would have been on the Giant Beast cast when he was still at Giant Bomb, and he's like a famous mech lover. Like him talking about it all the time on podcasts I listened to. That kind of like it started putting the seed in my head like, hey, why don't I just watch some Gundam? And the reason why, and it took me a while because I did the whole thing of like looking at like view orders and like, wow, the fuck, like this is a 40-year-old franchise. How the hell do you get into Gundam? Like, what is Gundam? And there are so many different opinions that people have about how you should watch Mobile Suit Gundam. And the only right opinion is just start with the first show because it's, in my opinion, the best, or at least the second best. Like it's maybe a toss-up for me between this and Turn A Gundam, which is a later show. But yeah, like there's so many people that are like, oh, you watch the compilation movies and then you do Zeta Gundam because everybody loves Zeta Gundam, or oh, you just watch like one of the other like later shows that's set in its own continuity, and it's like I don't know what to do. And so then eventually I was like, I think I had settled on I'm just going to check out the first episode of Mobile Suit Gundam. Not with a plan to watch all of Gundam. It was never a thing of like I'm just going to sit through and watch all of Gundam. That was not my objective going in. It wasn't like some like Doctor Who thing or something like that where I had like this plan. Because I think my idea was more I'll kind of watch the first episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, then I'll maybe check out the compilation movies and then move on to Zeta Gundam because everybody says Zeta Gundam is the best. And I had the vague impression that the first show was like okay because so many people said just watch the movies, and those don't listen to those people. Those people are wrong. Those are bad people. Don't pay attention to them.
I also am enjoying hearing this, Sean, because I know you as the guy who just sat down and watched all 800 episodes of Doctor Who in a row, and so I just know your destiny is you were going to start at the beginning and do all of it.
Yes, like obviously to anybody else, it's but the thing you don't know is all the times that like I start watch something and I like pull the chute like at the very beginning. I'm like, fuck this, I'm not going in, because I don't even remember all the times that that's happened, because it's only the times when the only time I ever watch something is when I go all the way in on it. But yeah, I was just like, I don't know, and I think part of it was I had this impression. I think part of it seeing screenshots, people saying just move on to Zeta Gundam because everyone says Zeta Gundam is way more adult, which is like it is in some ways but isn't in others. That I just had this impression that the first Mobile Suit Gundam was more of like a kids show from the 70s. And like that thing was like, that didn't sound like something I would be way into. And so I was just like, I'll just kind of watch the first episodes. And I think that's really important context is I thought it was something that was just like a kid's like Saturday morning cartoon, like Voltron or something like that. I had no context for what the fuck Gundam actually was, or like what the first show was. Because I knew that later Gundam talked about war and stuff. I just didn't think that's how it started. And so then I start watching the first episode, and then a little bit past the first half of the first episode, one of the main characters, Fraubo's entire family is killed right in front of her. And from that moment, I'm like, what the fuck is this show? And I was immediately hooked. And then so from that point, because that was also when all this started happening, was right after we graduated from Boulder was when like I started. So it was at that perfect point where it was like in between stuff for me. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was just like, well, shit, I'll just start watching Gundam. And then I watched Gundam like chronologically from Mobile Suit Gundam through like all its sequels and stuff. And then I have now, there's a couple of more recent things that I haven't gotten around to, but generally speaking, I've seen all the stuff. Like I haven't watched the weird live action G Savior movie that was made for like a TV company in Canada. I haven't like watched that weird shit. There's some like very recent stuff I haven't seen. But other than a couple of those small exceptions, I've seen like everything. Like I've seen the main series, I've seen the anime movies, I've seen the compilation movies, I've seen like the weird spin-off OVAs, I've seen like the weird 3-minute shorts. The only significant section of Gundam I have not seen is SD Gundam, which is like comedy, like Super Deformed Gundam, like comedy spin-off stuff. That's the only major part of the franchise I have no exposure to at all. Down to, I do like very occasionally make Gunpla figures, or Gundam plastic figures is what Gunpla stands for, which is a big, huge part of how the franchise got very popular, is that these figures were incredibly successful after Mobile Suit Gundam finished airing. And they're very fun to put together because they're like little, like they're put in like little plastic sheets, and you kind of cut them out and piece them together. And it's like a more sophisticated version of Legos that you come out the other side with like a highly opposable action figure. So they're actually, it's a very therapeutic, like fun thing to do. So yes. I have 5 of them now, and I brought up my model of the original Gundam, which is the first one I made.
I recognize him from the show. He is pointing his gun right at me.
Yep.
He's got the sword in his hand. I feel slightly intimidated because I know this is a powerful mech suit.
Yeah,
from the show I just watched.
Got a battleship class beam rifle pointed right at you.
Yes. I gotta say, Sean, I love you describing like your trepidation, like, I wonder if this is like a kid's show or something, like a Saturday morning cartoon. And I had no preconceived notions going in, and so I'm just like, that's the show where they killed the little girl's family in like minute 10.
Yeah.
And like, it's really fucking dark.
Yeah, so did you, Jonathan, have any experience with mecha stuff before this? Like, is that a genre you've ever really gotten into in any way?
Not really. I would say I'm where you were like 3 years ago, what you're saying. Where like, I know of mecha, you know? Like, I don't know how you don't know of it. But no, it is not a genre of anime I've ever dug that deep into. And it feels like this is the right one to start with, because it is not the original mecha anime, but it is certainly the granddaddy of them all in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because it's one of the weird things about mecha anime is that it does feel like it's so its own thing. Like, it feels like there's like a wall between mecha anime and all other anime, and like, because there had been a couple of things like Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a little bit different in some ways. Like, I had seen that. I had seen, what's it called, Eureka 7, which is, like, after I watched Mobile Suit Gundam, I realized Eureka 7 is just basically Mobile Suit Gundam with, like, a bigger, like, romance subplot in it. So, like, I'd seen some stuff, but, like, generally it was just, like, there's something about the mecha genre that feels like it's so its own thing within the overall scope of anime. But, yeah, I think it's fairly common that there are people who like anime and have seen stuff, but just, like, you just don't go into mecha. It feels like its own weird thing. But then once you go through it, it is very hard to stop, in my experience. So
it's like hentai.
Sure, that's definitely the metaphor we should be going with. Yes, the Gundam is like hentai.
Next summer.
This is going down a dark path. I want to lay out, before we go further, I want to lay out what the Gundam franchise looks like overall, now that I have like the experience of having seen all of it, because I think there's a lot of bad information on the internet about what Gundam is, because I think people have weird opinions about Gundam, and I have like, there's some of the general like fan consensus opinions that I somewhat agree with. Like, I think Zeta Gundam is very good, if not, maybe not absolutely the best show. It's a very good one, and I get why people sort of consider that to be the #1 show. That's the one that people kind of hold up as being like like Empire Strikes Back for Star Wars, Zeta Gundam, which is the sequel to the first show. People hold up that way. But there's a lot of bad opinions on the internet and a lot of like weird information about Gundam.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. We're here to set all that shit straight. So, Gundam is a franchise that's been going on for 40 years, and so for most people think that that's super intimidating. How could you ever get into Gundam? But it's way easier than I think it is for most other franchises. If you look at something like a Star Trek or a Doctor Who, those are franchises that have been going on for decades, but they also all are like in some way contiguous to one another, right? And so, other than with like some weird stuff like the J.J. Abrams reboot movie in Star Trek, all the Star Trek shows take place in the same universe, and they will reference aliens and political situations and characters from other shows. And so, you know, there's stuff about like Vulcans and Romulans and Klingons in basically every single Star Trek show. And sometimes if you don't have the knowledge from some of the other shows, it can be a little bit confusing. Gundam is very different from that, and that the whole Gundam franchise is kind of split into 2 different halves. The one half is Universal Century Gundam, or like I'll almost always call it UC Gundam, and the other half is Alternative Universe or AU Gundam. So UC Gundam, Universal Century stuff, that's the like core beginning of the franchise, and it's a number of different shows and movies and spin-offs all set within the same continuity. And so that's more like the Star Trek example. So Mobile Suit Gundam is the first show. It's set in the Universal Century setting. And then it had a sequel, Zeta Gundam, which takes characters and like is set like 10 or so years in the future. And so it has the same characters, it's set in the same setting. It carries on a lot of the themes and ideas. Zeta Gundam has its own sequel, Double Zeta Gundam, and then that show has a movie at the end called Char's Counterattack, which that's like the sort of core of the franchise is that first show, the two sequels to that show, and then that movie. And that's sort of like the core main continuity of Universal Century Gundam, and there are lots of other spin-offs and like OVA miniseries and manga and novels and stuff that are set in that timeline in that universe, but they're generally set with somewhere within the events depicted in those four things. Either maybe a little bit before the first show, like Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin, which is a prequel. There's stuff like Gundam Unicorn that is set a little bit after Char's Counterattack movie, but all those things are...
Gundam Unicorn?
Yes, Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn. It's very good.
Do they literally build a unicorn Gundam suit? Like
it's just a Gundam that has a like one horn. Like, it's not a big... There is a horse mobile suit in Mobile Fighter G Gundam called Funsaiki that Master Asia rides, but that's a very different thing. That's not UC Gundam.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get to Mobile Fighter G Gundam someday. That's a very different show.
I just wanted like a rainbow unicorn horse that goes around stabbing people with its horn.
Yeah, you don't quite get that.
Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted, but
No.
you said something very exciting.
Yes, Unicorn Gundam. Lots of them. Like, I am definitely going to say things that sound ridiculous, like Iron-Blooded Orphans, and just move past it, because Gundam has very good titles, right? Like Double Zeta Gundam.
Yes.
Great fucking title. So those like four things, Mobile Suit Gundam, Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta, Char's Counterattack, those are kind of the core set of Gundam's shows and the movie, and that's the main timeline, and all those things were kind of like made one after the other, more or less. Then they made a movie called Gundam F91, that's set later in the Universal Century timeline. They made another show called Victory Gundam set even further in the timeline. But those things are so far away that they kind of have nothing to do with and have no characters from the original kind of set series. And that's when, after they did Victory Gundam, is when they kind of decided, let's do something else with this franchise. And so that's when they kind of just created AU Gundam, or Alternate Universe Gundam. And that's what the Gundam franchise has been since, is occasional miniseries set around the timeline of the original shows, or a big full own TV series that is set completely in its own universe. So by AU Gundam, I mean all these different kind of pockets that are their own continuity. So when I say Gundam Wing is its own 50-episode anime series that then has, I think it has like a small movie or OVA series, something like that, set after it called Endless Waltz. But that's its own thing. And Gundam Wing is its own thing, and it started and it's ended, and maybe there'll occasionally be a spin-off kind of set in that universe, but it's totally its own thing. If you have never seen any other Gundam thing, but you like saw a couple of episodes of Gundam Wing on Toonami, and you really want to watch more Gundam Wing, you can just watch Gundam Wing, and you need no other knowledge. Same thing with something like Iron-Blooded Orphans. The most recent one, that's set entirely its own universe. You can go into that with no preconceived notions, no knowledge of Gundam at all, and that show will explain everything about its own rules, its own characters, it's like the mobile suits. All of those things exist on their own in all of those series, and that's really what the bulk of the Gundam franchise has been since. So if you've heard about things like Gundam Seed, that's another one of those kinds of shows, or Mobile Fighter G Gundam, which is like a very silly martial arts kind of take on Gundam. That's its own weird thing. That's its own universe. And those things never intersect. They never interact. They're all set in their own kind of pocket universe. And that's one of the really nice things about Gundam as a franchise, is that you don't have to start at the beginning. You only have to start at the beginning if you want to watch those original shows in that order. But other than watching Mobile Suit Gundam, Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta, and Char's Counterattack the movie, other than that, you can basically watch Gundam in any order, and you are totally fine.
And there's not a lot of long-running anime like that.
No, yeah.
Because, like, if you take a Dragon Ball, it's all in order. You don't have to watch everything to, like, understand the current one, Dragon Ball Super. but it would be weird if you didn't. You
Yeah.
know, or like even something that like airs more infrequently, like Lupin the Third started at the same time as Gundam. It was also I think 70. It was a little earlier than 70.
Yeah, it was earlier.
But same around time. It is. Again, you don't have to do everyone, but it is a continuing thing with those characters.
Yeah, and if you're the kind of person like me that is very bothered by starting in the middle of something and not liking missing references to things, Gundam is actually nice because you can, if you have a hard time watching old anime, and I get it, like for some people that's just like a hard thing to do, and you just want to watch whatever's easy to watch, you could just watch Iron-Blooded Orphans. It's very good, and see if you like Mecha Gundam kind of stuff that way.
See how much iron is in the blood of those orphans.
Yes, they're born on Mars, so that's why it's
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just like the red dust of Mars. It's a very good show. But yeah, and yeah, another important thing, kind of as you pointed out a little bit earlier, one thing that's really nice about Gundam is it is not based on anything else. So the core canon of Gundam is all the different individual anime TV shows. It's not a manga series. It's not a light novel series. So that's something that, especially in today's anime landscape, is very rare, is the ability to just watch a show that is like, you know, Mobile Suit Gundam has 43 episodes. It's 43 episodes of the show. It is as a beginning, middle, and end. At the end of Mobile Suit Gundam, it is done. Yes, there is a sequel, but the sequel is set like 8 years or something in the future. It was made like 6 years later. It has some of the same characters carry over, but it has its own protagonist. It's like you can watch this show and then have it be done and finished. And it's not the kind of thing of, oh, they made like 12 episodes of an adaptation of whatever this popular manga is, and you watch those 12 episodes and they never adapt any more of it, and you're like, well, fuck, either I have to go find the manga and like decide, do I read the manga from the beginning because I want to see what the ending is, or do I just try to figure out where the fuck the anime left off? None of that bullshit.
Or the opposite bullshit of like, man, we're running really close to where the manga is right now in Weekly Jump, so we're going to have to do 30 weeks where we throw the protagonist in a video game world.
Yes, exactly. There's no, like, here's some random filler. There's no Garlic Jr. saga of Gundam, right? They don't have those kinds of adaptational issues because it's just one of those rare long-running franchises where the anime TV show part of it is the main thing. And so, you know, it's like with, like, Doctor Who, the TV show is the main part of Doctor Who. Star Wars, the movies are the main part of Star Wars. Gundam, the anime series are the main part of Gundam. And you can just, if you like to watch TV anime, Gundam is a really nice franchise to get into because there are a lot of TV anime shows you can watch that are set in Gundam, but they're all very digestible on their own because none of them are longer than 50 episodes. So you can just pick a show and watch it and be happy and have fun. And again, like because Mobile Suit Gundam, the first show, is my favorite, I would say like you should start there because it's so good. But you can honestly start wherever. And if you just like really like the aesthetic of Gundam Wing, or you really thought like Gundam 00 is really cool looking, or Iron-Blooded Orphans looks cool, or you have a friend that is a big fan of Gundam Seed, you can just watch those shows and just watch those shows, and then it's cool and it's fine and it's good. And that's one of the things that is really nice about the Gundam franchise, is that it is, while it seems intimidating on the outside because it's so old, like a lot of these kind of media franchises are, it is actually way more accessible than any other one I've encountered.
Yeah, I mean, a main trilogy of anime plus a movie for like the main original continuity, that's not hard at all.
Yes. And if you don't want to bother with Universal Century stuff, you don't have to. Like, there's lots of great stuff in there, but if you don't want to commit to all that, you don't have to. So, yeah, so that's what the Gundam franchise looks like. And then finally, before we get into actually discussing the shows, or the first two episodes, I want to give you, Jonathan, a little bit of context of what this looked like coming into Mobile Suit Gundam, because there's a lot of like interesting sort of genre history in terms of how this got born. So the main creative figure behind Gundam as a franchise and this first show is a man named Yoshiyuki Tomino. And so I will often probably refer to him while we're talking about these episodes as like Tomino did this or that, because if you have to pick an auteur figure for Gundam, it's definitely Tomino. He was the creative director for this show, Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta, like basically all the original Universal Century stuff I just said. He was involved with all of that. And then he has come back periodically to do a couple of AU shows over the years. So Tomino got started in anime actually as, I think he was like a production assistant on Astro Boy. So he was there from like the ground floor. Astro Boy is basically the first anime thing made. So he worked with Osamu Tezuka adapting that. And then so he started working anime in the 60s that way, and then slowly kind of worked his way up to being a director of multiple different shows. And then eventually he started directing different mecha series. But before Mobile Suit Gundam, the mecha genre was a little bit different than what it is now. where all the shows are what we would now call super robot shows. And a super robot show or a super robot mecha is like, think of like Voltron, or Mazinger Z is like kind of like one of the first ones. And it's that kind of show where, yeah, it's a giant robot, but it's more kind of fantasy in nature, where the robot doesn't feel as scientific. Almost always they're fighting like some sort of alien force or like alien army or something, and it's a group of very small kids piloting this magic robot fighting aliens, and it's much more lighthearted, much more goofy. You know, think of stuff like Ultraman is technically an alien, but it's sort of that kind of mecha thing, or Power Rangers with the Megazords, like that's a super robot kind of concept. That sort of thing where it's very child-focused. That's what Mecha was, and so Tomino started working on those shows.
You know, like the American Transformers kind of be like that?
Transformers is definitely more super robot, yeah, where it's more sort of like sci-fi fantasy kind of feel.
I know it's not an anime, but just like as a touchstone for people who might know that show.
Yes, yeah. So like Transformers is a good example of something else that would be kind of like that. So Tomino got started working on shows like that, but he started pushing them to be kind of more dark and more edgy and a bit more adult. And eventually he was working for the production studio Sunrise, that still is, you know, they're the Gundam people, and they eventually let him make a show, and that would eventually become Mobile Suit Gundam. It started out as like something like Freedom Fighter or something or other, and it went through a long iteration process before eventually settling on becoming what we know as Mobile Suit Gundam. And so when Mobile Suit Gundam came out, the objective was to push the mecha genre into a very different direction. And one of the reasons why Gundam is so hailed and influential is because it created this split in the mecha genre, where now we have two halves, basically. You either have the super robot stuff like Mazinger Z, or you have stuff like Gundam, which is called real robot, which is leaning way more into hard sci-fi stuff, where it's about, you know, the mecha have a more scientific basis, a more mechanical look to them. Typically, you don't have like aliens or anything. It's about two different human factions fighting each other, like in Gundam. It's generally set more like around in Earth, and like a more like near future kind of Earth setting. All the stuff that Gundam does to ground its setting in a sort of hard sci-fi sense, that's the stuff that became very influential and spawned what we now call this like kind of real robot subgenre. And that's the way that like fans will still discuss this, both on like the Japanese side and the English side, is you have super robot shows and you have real robot shows. And one of the things that to me is so interesting about the first Mobile Suit Gundam is that it straddles that divide in a really interesting way, where Sunrise, the production company, like when Tomino would try to push things a little bit too hard into like the adult real kind of direction, they would pull back. So one of the reasons why the Gundam looks so bright and colorful is because that's the design of like the super robot aesthetic of like the white and blue and red and gold. Originally he wanted it to be more kind of military looking colors, but I actually think the dichotomy between here's what on the surface, like one of the reasons why I thought when I started approaching Gundam that the first show was a kid's show is because it has that aesthetic of the super robot shows that are just like kids' Saturday morning cartoons, but the actual thematic and narrative content of it skews way hard in the other direction. And that contrast to me, I've always found very, very interesting and kind of electric in at the core of the show. So that's sort of where the genre divide happens. Some other important context is while the original Mobile Suit Gundam was airing, it wasn't actually that popular. So they originally had a slate of 52 episodes to be made, so it would be a weekly anime that would run for a full year. But while it was airing, it wasn't catching on very well. So it was originally going to get cut back to 39 episodes, then petitioned to have an extra month, which is how we arrive at the final 43 episodes. Which I honestly actually think, based on reading what their plans were for the full 52, that actually scrunching the ending down and contracting it works probably better for the narrative. And we'll talk about that obviously when we get to the end and how they change things and sort of what the ending's like. But yeah, so the Gundam effectively got canceled early, but after it finished airing, Namco got the rights to make the figures, or I think it was technically Bandai at the time, and so they were making all these Gundam figures, and those started getting really popular, and so they would rerun the show, and the reruns of the show were really popular, and so then, because the reruns of the show were so popular, they got the green light to make the compilation movies which are 3 movies that cobble together footage from the original airing of the show with some new footage spliced in there as well, and like new audio recording and stuff like that, new sound effects that kind of tell the whole story of the original 43 episodes, but in these 3 sort of big chunks. I think the compilation movies are okay, but I think like the pacing of the TV show is much better. But those compilation movies were hugely successful and were some of the most successful movies of the years that they released. I think they made something like 5 billion yen altogether in the early, like in like 1981 and 2. So like hugely successful movies. And that's what then got them the green light to make Zeta Gundam, which came out, I think, in 84. So that's once Zeta Gundam, the sequel, came out, that's when Gundam, like, sort of as a franchise got started and, like, rolled on. But it was, like, it's funny that the show was not originally created with the objective of selling toys. It wasn't like a G.I. Joe or Transformers thing, but ultimately the sale of the toys is what kind of revived Gundam and brought it back, so that then more people were exposed to it, and then once people were exposed to it, they're like, holy shit, this thing is amazing, and that's how it became so successful.
It always comes back to the merchandising.
It does.
It's like Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata's company didn't necessarily struggle in its early years, but they did not have a huge hit until the 90s. But Totoro was not a hit in theaters, in part because they paired it with Grave of the Fireflies, the saddest movie ever made.
That's an interesting double feature.
It's the weirdest double feature in movie history.
Yeah.
But because their movies merchandised so well, particularly Totoro plushes just floated Ghibli for like a fucking decade, and that's part of why they've always been independent and been able to do whatever the hell they want. Like, eventually their movies became very big on their own terms, but even when they weren't, like, they never had to worry because they could just go sell some Totoro plush toys. You know, it's capitalism at its best.
Yeah, oftentimes merchandising destroys things, but every once in a while it allows something new to be born.
Yes.
And it definitely, like, fucking merchandising 100% saved Gundam.
And if you get a cool model out of it, hey, why not?
Yeah, and hey, like, Gunpla, if you get into Gundam, it's very cool. I never would have thought I'd be the kind of person that would make model figures like that, but there's something so kind of like therapeutic, and it's so much better than just buying an action figure, because it's like, here's like this 2-hour little kind of construction project that is something that if you're so swamped with like all this other shit I need to do, it's like that are like big scale projects you need to do, sometimes you just need something very small that feels very practical and hands-on. That's like, I can just build this fucking little thing and like solve some sort of small problem so that like I can distract myself from the big shit that I can't solve in the moment. Like, that's like seriously, I would recommend people consider. You can do like Lego figures or whatever, but
yes, no, I do it too.
As an adult, don't just ignore that thing because you think it's for kids. It's like a good like mental health tip or something.
I built a big Lego set this year, and I think I got more out of it than I did as a kid.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's what people said about like Nintendo Labo, was like, who gives a shit about the game? Yep. I just want to make some cool cardboard thing because that's way more fun and it just feels good.
Indeed.
But yeah, so that's the Gundam. It's about making those figures, but it's also about how war is evil, and you know the proliferation of weapons technology means that child soldiers will become more and more effective as we go into the future. It's a lot of shit.
Wow.
So let's talk about Mobile Suit Gundam.
We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about episodes 1 and 2 of Mobile Suit Gundam. All right, so Sean, you want to talk about these first 2 episodes we watched for this episode?
So the first thing we should address, we should start from the beginning. The opening animation for Mobile Suit Gundam is fucking amazing.
It's so good. It really does a good job of straddling the line of kind of what the show itself does, as you were describing, of like trying to go in like a harder direction, but it also has these you know, kid-friendly elements maybe, or these bright, colorful elements. Because I love it is this bright, colorful opening with this really great song, but like the lyrics are like they very much fit the show.
Yes,
you know, it's it put a smile on my face. Got me ready to watch the show. That's what a theme song's supposed to do.
Yes, but the first time I watched it, you can see how even through that first like 90 seconds, I was still duped to think that this was a kid's show, because if you're not paying attention to the lyrics, it just looks like this is like a Saturday morning cartoon, something like whatever. It's a really good song, and I love that song to death. But it seemed like it was still a kid's show. And then after that, you get the opening narration that I just want to read the narration because it's so good. It is the year 0079 of the Universal Century. A half-century has passed since Earth began moving its burgeoning population into gigantic, orbiting space colonies. A new home for mankind where people are born and raised and where they die. 9 months ago, the cluster of colonies, furthest from the Earth, called Side 3, proclaimed itself the Principality of Zeon and launched a war of independence against the Earth Federation. Initial fighting lasted over 1 month, and half the population of humanity died. People were horrified by the indescribable atrocities that had been committed in the name of independence. 8 months have passed since the rebellion began, and the war was at a stalemate.
That is such an enormous info dump. I was really happy when it played again at the start of episode 2.
Yeah, it plays again at the beginning of, like, I think the first 10 or so episodes, yeah.
Because when it came on again at part 2, I'm like, I understand some of this now.
Yes.
Okay, this is good. It's like a test. Like, now I can, I get, the Z, what is it?
Zeon.
The Zeon people, they're the bad guy. Okay, I get that. That's where Char's from. Okay. Oh, half of the population died. Okay, they were serious about that. That's dark. Is that like an origin prequel show where they just show half of humanity fucking dying?
So what happens, because you can see it, they don't say it in the narration, but you see it because they animate it, is within the first month after what's called the Battle of Loom, the Zeon forces drop a space colony onto the surface of the Earth and like drive a space colony into the Earth, and that's what causes most of the casualties. Because obviously, like, the explosion and everything kills a lot of people, but it causes a massive ecological disaster that once we get deeper into the show, you start to see some of the effects of that on Earth. But yes, so Zeon dropped a colony on Earth. Half the population is dead. It's a bad time to be a human.
It is.
In the world of Gundam.
The Zeon people, they got a real beef with this Federation.
Yeah,
that's a pretty brutal civil war. They're not just like, yeah, we just want to be self-governed. They're like, we're gonna fucking kill all of you.
Yeah. So obviously, as we go deeper into the show, we'll learn more about what the Earth Federation is like, what is up with the Principality of Zeon, and all that kind of stuff. I'll try to avoid giving too many spoilers. One thing I do want to say now that I'm thinking about it, before I slip on it, just to let you know. This conflict after Mobile Suit Gundam is referred to as the 1 year war because it lasts 1 year in time. And I am no way going to be able to not call it that because it's what it's always referred to as. Obviously, they don't call it that in this show because that would be like a show set during World War I calling World War I World War I. Yes. So if I ever refer to something as the 1 year war, understand that I'm referring to this conflict between the Earth Federation and the Principality of Zeon.
Just in Googling the show, saw that term. So,
yes. So I just realized I should probably say that before I start saying that and nobody knows what the fuck I'm talking about if they've just started watching with this show. But yeah, so that opening animation and sort of narration is definitely very dense with information, but it is such a good kind of somber way to... It's honestly like a way better version of like the opening crawl of Star Wars, where it gives you that, like, it's basically the text that would be the opening crawl. But I love like all the animation you see, and you get to see what the space colonies look like. I love like that pause that the narrator has, and he says, "and where they die," and you see the colony exploding. It's a good opener to set the mood, and then you have what I think is like one of the just most effective first like minute to like 90 seconds of at the beginning of any episode of an anime of like what is the real beginning of this show, which is you just see a space colony slowly spinning through space, and they have these like nice, again, kind of hard sci-fi looking cylindrical colonies that spin to create the artificial gravity, and it's a slow pan shot through space that then all of a sudden this green metallic dome jumps into the frame with this single like piercing red eye in the middle of its visor. And you see it's one of three what we will come to know are Zaku's, which are the Zeon mobile suit that are slowly drifting towards that space colony. And you just have the like breathing noise of the Zaku thing as it goes through, and they infiltrate the colony. They slide down that hill, and one, I think it's Slender, Sergeant Slender, I think he is, says, "Oh, this is weird. Why is nobody around? Where is everybody?" And someone says like, "Oh no, look, there's a girl," and then it zooms in, and then you cut to Frau Bo's perspective as she comes into Amuro's house. I love that opening of you following the Zeon forces as they infiltrate the colony. And that's the first thing you do, and then it's that really really elegant cut from their perspective to who is like going to be our main characters with Frau Bo and then Amuro and then his friends. That transition is so smooth and so well done.
Yeah, because you could very easily just start this with like Amuro in his lab or his bedroom, I guess. But he's working on that computer, and you could start that, and then Fraubo could come in and like be like, "No, we've got to leave. We've got to evacuate." But that would not be nearly as accomplished in terms of contextualizing as what they actually do with space, the colony, the Xeon forces. They're going down. You're not sure actually who's the good guy and bad guy yet if you're just watching it for the first time, because they're there on a scouting mission. They're not being violent yet, so it's and there's actually, I think, a lot of that in these first two episodes of like, it is not framed in the traditional we're watching bad guys, we're watching good guys. We're watching two sides of the conflict, so I can already tell they're going to complicate these lines. Probably you're nodding along, so I think I've probably got something there. And then you go in and you meet Fraubo and you meet Amuro, and at this point you're not sure who's the protagonist, who's going to be our central figure. It's really not until I would say the halfway point of this first episode where you start to get a sense of who we're going to be following. And I think it's something this first episode impressed me with overall, is that, you know, Amuro winds up being the protagonist by the time, you know, he steps into that suit, but it comes fairly organically. Like, what if Fraubo had found the instruction manual or something, and he had been doing something else, and she had decided to take that initiative and had that knowledge? Like, it doesn't feel like predetermined or predestined, or like we're just following one person on this journey to become the hero. It really does feel like we're examining this big conflict holistically, and this person winds up in the right place at the right time. We could also say wrong place at the wrong time. And things happen. And it's part of what makes, we've already hinted at how much we like this first episode. It is so propulsive, so much happens, and I think it is in part because of how well they contextualize and frame things.
Absolutely, because it's one of the things that I think Tomino's sort of style as a storyteller is he does this really interesting thing that like nothing else I've ever seen kind of replicates, of where he both gives you like really big picture information, and then he'll give you like really small picture information, but he kind of misses everything in the middle, I think intentionally, and creates a certain like disorientation where you have to fill in a lot of gaps by like sort of making careful observations of what's going on and kind of connect things together. That gives you that sense that you're talking about of not quite knowing who is the protagonist here, like who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. Like I think there's a very intentional sort of sense of plucking out pieces of information that most other shows would just give you directly immediately as exposition or some like very clear indicator, and trying to allow the viewer to start to make connections on their own. And that's very much a sort of hallmark of his storytelling style that you can see right away.
I mean, I think if you laid out the plot summary and then asked someone, where do you think this story starts? You'd probably say with the town getting the evacuation order, right? Mm-hmm. That's where and that's alighted a lot of the stuff with, like, you know, we meet Amuro and learn about kind of the Gundam project before we meet his father, who is working on the Gundam project. Yeah. All of these little things, I think, add up to put you right in the midst of the action. It's a very kind of, first person is wrong because it is omniscient, but like you're in the middle of it. It's very immersive. It does not feel like it has this remove where it is intentionally, as you say, showing you everything. It's big picture, so you know where we are. But then it's a lot of like, we're with Amuro, and this first episode is that journey of basically getting off the planet.
Yeah.
And it's really compelling.
Yeah, it's really, as I say, that's like propulsive is a good word to use, because it's this first episode, which I should just say, like, this is like one of, in my opinion, like the best first episodes of any TV show I've ever seen. Like the amount of work it does to establish the setting, the main character, like the core themes of the show that obviously we'll be able to go into more detail as we get deeper into the series. But all of that stuff just delivered in this really exciting, quick-paced fashion that, like, it's nice because it has this very old-fashioned sensibility of, it reminds me of like an old like 60s comic book or something like that, like the first issue of Spider-Man or Amazing Fantasy 15. That's like, there's so much information that it's able to communicate to you, but I think Gundam has this like elegance to it that it just sort of lays out everything it needs to do with such an efficient sort of like direct fashion without ever losing the sense of drama that it's also trying to convey. And that's something that is really remarkable. And like I said, when I originally watched this, I had no plans on it being like a whole Gundam thing I was going to do, and then you get like halfway through this episode, it's like, fuck it, like I have to watch this whole show. Like, how are you not immediately compelled by what happens in this first episode?
Because I have to say, it's pretty rare these days. Maybe this is a me problem. It is partially, but like that I sit down and watch a TV show, and whether it's 25 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever it is, that at some point I don't feel a tug to like check my phone or stand up or like I don't know, just like I'm a little twitchy in that way.
Yeah, as someone who's been watching through Game of Thrones for the first time, I understand that feeling very well.
Yes, well, especially because a lot of American TV just has a lot of fucking dead air in it.
Yeah.
But like even with anime too, because we were talking about this earlier too, that Gundam not being based on a manga means it just has an inherently different pace than pretty much any anime I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because I do not know if I've actually watched an anime to completion that is not based on a manga. I would have to like look at that. And most people, that's probably true.
Yeah.
But like, or like something like Dragon Ball Super, which there is not there is a Dragon Ball Super manga, but like it was
they're like co-developed.
They're co-developed. But obviously the original source material is a manga. So like just sometimes like if that's the pace for an anime, they know like okay we're gonna do this part of the story to this part of the story. We fit it into 25 minutes. Sometimes it'll be really fast with no dead air, but sometimes there'll be 3 minutes of I don't know, Krillin looking at Frieza and being scared or something, right? And it's just so, and it's not breathless. It's very well paced. But like it is, I had no compulsion to do anything else. I stared at my computer screen for 25 minutes. I barely blinked. At one point, like an email alert came up, and I got so annoyed. I'm like turning off my Wi-Fi because I'm like, I just want. And then it was like I had to take a couple minutes to like breathe after that first episode because so much happened. And it's like, all right, episode 2 right now, now. I have a couple hours before I have to go see Sean and do this podcast, but I'm watching it right now.
Yep. No, like that's exactly the sensation I had. Especially like I love you get to have that nice eye catch in the middle of these episodes just to be like holy shit.
Yes.
So much stuff has happened. And the show does start to slow down past this point because obviously
it would have to.
Yeah, like it has to introduce so many characters because we have a nice big ensemble cast together by the end of episode 2, and so like we have to introduce for this like basically like 10 or 11 characters to the viewer across these 2 episodes. It's like there's so much information they need to communicate. They do it so well. So let's talk about what sort of the middle point of the episode. So we have Amuro is in his house, and Frabo comes to get him, pull him out for the evacuation order. And that's when then they like go back. They realize it's the Zaku's. Shit starts going down. Amuro and Frabo are trying to escape, and that's where the scene that happened that like.
Well, let's back up because
okay. Do you want to?
Because the Zaku, there's the 2 Zaku captains, Slender, and who's the other guy?
Slender's the main one I remember.
The other guy dies in this episode.
They all die. All 3 of them die by the end of the 2 episodes.
But the other guy is important because they're there on a scouting mission, and he just straight up decides, okay, oh my god, they're making their own mobile suits, because this is the whole point, is that the Zaku's the Zeon Force. What are they? The propriety of Zeon or something?
The Principality.
The Principality of Zeon. Their big war advantage is they have the mobile suits.
Yes, because they're the space colonists, so they had developed that technology to help them build space colony stuff, and so then they secretly developed it into a weapon. So one of the reasons why they're winning the war is because they have these Zaku 2s, and the Earth Federation doesn't have anything that good. Yeah,
so these 2 Zakus came down to this colony not to kill anyone. They were there to scout. They see they've got these Gundams without orders. The young guy who's like very impulsive decides let's just destroy this base.
Yeah, he has the good line where he's like, Lieutenant Char won his like glory in real combat, so I'm going to go do this shit.
Yes, so that's part of the horror of it. It is completely unprovoked violence, because he also doesn't have to kill the people to do it. It's like complete bloodlust, and then as you say, you get the scene that tells you what this show is about to a degree, where Amuro is like looking around, he's like, where is everyone? He sees Fraubo, he's like, Fraubo, and yell, and then boom, and she gets blasted out of the sky towards the camera. Basically, you think she might be dead, but no, we do this. It's a beautiful like pan up over this little hill and just pile of bodies, and Fraubo's entire family is dead.
Yes, and Fraubo like stands up and says like, "Mom, Grandma," and she like stumbles over to her mom's body and is like shoving it, and then Amuro runs over and grabs her and like slaps her. It's like, "No, Frau, you're stronger than this. Like you have to get up, you have to run." And this is the part that like I've seen this episode like 4 or 5 because I've watched this episode multiple times without watching the rest of Gundam because I think it's so fucking good. It gets me every time where she stands up and he's like, you have to run, Fraubo, you have to run, you have to run. And she starts stumbling away, like away from the camera, basically over the bodies. And it's this nice, like, you know, cut to her, cut back to close up on Amuro's face, cut back to her. She's like trying to walk up that hill, and she slips and falls, and he's just like, come on, Fraubo, that's the way to go. Like, you can do it, you can do it. As tears start forming on his face, it's like every time that happens, it hits me so hard. And there's something about just like the bluntness of it that is still shocking to me. Like, it's still, every time you get that, where it's like all those people are dead, and Fraubo's just like has to deal with this new reality, and she can barely cope with it and is like stumbling to try to get away. It hits me so hard every single time I've watched it.
Because there's also a thematic thing going on here that I know this theme becomes bigger later in the series because you've talked about it, but the child soldier idea.
Yeah.
Because you do have a scene somewhere in here where we have Amuro's dad.
Yes, Tamray.
These names are...
The names are one of the best parts of Gundam.
They're A+.
Yes.
But anyway, Tamray talking about kind of the goal of the Gundam project. And don't they have a line about, like, we want to eliminate soldiers on the battlefield, but especially young people, and like, yes, Gundam will allow us to do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's talking to Bright, and Bright says like, "Oh, I'm 19 years old," and he sees a picture of Amuro on this. Yes. It's like, "Oh, is that your son, sir?" And he's like, "Yes, he's only 15, and like I've heard there are children as young as him fighting on the front lines. Like, if we can win this war, we can get that to stop happening."
Yes, and of course the great irony of, again, just the first half of this one episode is that because of all these actions different adults have taken, all the adults in this colony are just wiped out in one blow. And it's down to Fraubo and Amuro, and kind of just the kids are left. And there's no one else to go pilot that Gundam. That's one of the things I really like about the choices Amuro makes here, is it doesn't feel contrived. It feels very much like this situation was forced upon him. And like, his heroism comes from taking the initiative, and what he does, he has to do, because they build a scenario whereby if he didn't do that, as impulsive as it is, everything would be lost.
Yeah.
You know, including into the second episode, just defending like the Gundam weaponry itself that could have been stolen and replicated by the other soldiers. So I find that all very interesting, and it immediately starts making you question those ideas of like child soldiers and moreover just young people fighting old people's wars.
Yeah, which is one of those really important distinctions I think Tomino probably wanted to like establish really firmly in this first episode, is we are not ignoring the trope that children are always the protagonists of these kinds of shows. We're leaning into it and making it one of our core thematic principles, is looking at like, child soldiers are a thing. They have always been a thing throughout all of history. Like, let's explore some of that idea instead of it just being like, well, it's aimed for a younger demographic, so we're going to have a younger character be the protagonist, and it's a big action show. It's like, let's actually look at what that concept would look like more realistically.
I mean, the show's whole attitude when he gets in that suit is fascinating to me, because it is, you know, you could very easily imagine your model here, like that Gundam suit that he has, being on just a total kid show, a super robot show, as you say, and then everyone be like, yeah, I've got my big suit, let's go have fun, guys, you know, let's play. An episode where they probably use their big beam swords to like play tennis or something.
Yeah.
I could imagine that. But he's like in that suit, like tearing up. He's actively scared.
He's like, I love how they animate like flop sweaty Amuro whenever like battles start. He's just like sweating and like freaking out. He's like, oh, I don't know what to do, and he's like trying to pilot it while like having the fucking manual like balanced on his knees. Like, what do I press? What do I do?
Having the fucking manual out is one thing that I have to say very much distinguishes this for me. Of there's no like, he has just an innate ability, other than that he is smart and good with machines, but he has to like pull out a fucking paper manual and look things up.
Yeah.
And it's I feel like that signals a certain attitude of the show as well. So like, that dichotomy alone of being in this big, fun, colorful suit, but it's not fun. It's battle, it's war, it's dark. It's what's happening is really serious life and death, and everybody gets that. Viewer, creator, characters in the show, all very interesting to me.
Yes, yeah. And one other thing I really like, I think there are some really good shots around this part of the show, or of the episode, that really do this well. I love the scale of the Zaku's compared to the people. And one of my favorite shots is, I think it's after the Zaku shoots that like hangar full of soldiers, which are the first people that Amuro sees killed. And then you just have this shot of like Amuro in the background, and these massive like bullet shells falling like right in front of the camera, and you get that sense of like, oh god, like the shells from the bullets fired by the guns carried by these things. It's not the Zaku itself, it's like part of the bullet that it shoots from its rifle are like as big as a fucking car. And like the sense of the like powerlessness that a normal person has to do anything in this scenario where you're dealing with a weapon that is like that is so striking. And any time in any mech show where they can have that kind of get like the relative sense of scale down so effective in like that kind of dramatic way, it like the kaiju loving part of me like gets hit really hard by that, like, oh my god, like, yeah. And I love having like the Zaku stand next to these like artificial trees on the colony, and like that sense of scale between these giant human figures and like the actual humans on the ground, that if like, again, if it shot the fucking bullet casing flying through the air could kill like 3 people when it landed.
Absolutely. One other thing I want to talk about with like this episode and the early stuff, and it's not so much just about the show or the story, but sort of an overall like cultural attitude towards some things, is that one of, this episode has so much to do, and one of the ways it is so economic is it doesn't question the things we just automatically buy into, like people getting into a giant robot suit and fighting.
Yeah.
There's no time wasted on, here's how the robot suit like works, and like this is how, I mean, you see it in action a little bit.
There's like one line about like, oh, it's got a learning computer or something. Yeah.
But it's not, we don't sit down and be like, that seems silly that you built a giant robot. Why would you do that?
Yeah, there's nobody like sitting around being like, oh, what should we call this? It's some sort of Gundam. Like, yeah, yes. There's nothing. There's no something like that.
And that's one thing that like, there are a lot of very Japanese genres. Mecha is one, kaiju is another.
Yeah. That
in Japan, one of the reasons they work is I think there is just a cultural buy-in to the concept.
Yeah.
That the shows or movies themselves don't have to waste time on. That when they get adapted to America, you see a problem where America, particularly Hollywood, feels like it has to spend a lot of time justifying its own concept.
Yeah.
We just talked about this with on the main Weekly Stuff podcast with Godzilla King of the Monsters, where that movie just spends too much time.
Yeah, it's one of the things that kills the first act of that movie.
Yeah. That movie is 130 minutes. Most Godzilla movies are like 100 minutes. Mm-hmm. That extra half hour is mostly technobabble explaining just like, no, I get it. They're monsters. They're going to fight, right?
Yeah.
Or like Pacific Rim is a movie we love.
Yes.
I also think that movie spends too much time explaining the science of like, there's too many convoluted elements to just explain why. Because it feels like, well, getting in a robot is silly, so we really have to explain it and justify it. Or like another one I've seen is Rooster Teeth's newest animated show is something called Genlock, which is their attempt at a mecha anime. There's some interesting stuff in it. It's very well animated. There's some cool things in it, but like that's another one where I was like, good God, I get it. They're gonna get in a fucking robot. This is really like overwrought in terms of building a plot, and it is just something I've thought of like a lot of anime stories are really good at for their genre. Just like there are things we accept and we can move on and tell a story. And there's an economy to these 25 minutes where, like, if any, like, piece of Hollywood tried to adapt Gundam, it would spend them a solid hour, I would bet, to get to the point where this episode gets by the first 25 minutes.
Yeah, and, like, one of the things that's really important about it with Gundam is there is, and we'll probably talk about this next episode, is more kind of like the world-building stuff, because we'll get deeper into it. But there are lots of, like, really interesting, kind of, like, really well-thought-through world-building concepts that are fundamental to how this universe works. And, like, we'll talk about Minovsky particles, because I don't think that word has even been said yet.
I don't think so. But I would have remembered that.
Yes, there's all, because I was kind of waiting for it to be like, I need to wait to see when they say this term, because I want to explain what this means, because they take a while to explain it. But yeah, so we'll probably get to that next episode. But there's lots of little things, and, like, what the fuck, like, the sides are, So, like, Zeon is from side 3, we're in side 7, and like the space colonies. Like, there's lots of interesting world building concepts that are really well thought through, that the show doesn't stop and sit and have, like, Bright sit Amuro down at the end of episode 2 and be like, and this is what this is, and and have just like this big exposition episode that's like that's the classic thing of where everyone knows, like, well, all these characters know all this information, why are they saying it? Like, as you know, Amuro, the sides are this and blah blah blah. Yeah, like, you don't have any scenes like that because the characters know what they know. The show is smart enough, and Tomino as a storyteller trusts his audience, I think, implicitly to be an intelligent audience, and so he's not going to spend time on that. And the things that all the work they did in the world building of the setting of Gundam to justify all the hard sci-fi elements are things that are just baked into the world, and when they come up, they just come up, and he just leaves it to like the audience to kind of put things together. And so that's one of the ways that allows you to then be able to have the protagonist get into the robot halfway through the first episode. So it's like there's only like 10 to 12 minutes of this whole show that is spent before the protagonist gets into the robot. Whereas, like, if you could imagine an American version, it would be like episode 3 before he fucking actually gets into the goddamn thing.
That sounds early to me, you know?
Yes,
like,
yeah. And you're able to do that while also maintaining this really, like, sort of, like, real feeling world.
No, there is a confidence to this first episode that is like the best sci-fi or fantasy, just throws you into the deep end of the world and trusts that you will get it, and that if by the end of 2-3 episodes you don't understand everything you're seeing, that's okay.
Yeah.
You'll get it eventually, and maybe if you don't, that's okay too. Like, it is its own world, and what matters is the characters, the forward momentum. Those things you're going to have a really clear grasp on, I feel like.
Yes.
Or there'll be a character like Char who, okay, I don't fully understand this guy's motivations yet, but he's very compelling and I look forward to learning more. Those are the kinds of things you want to get to know, and it does it I mean, it honestly, this first episode is kind of a masterclass in seamless, immersive world building.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, so after all the stuff we've talked about, we have our first fight scene, because one of the things that's interesting about the first Mobile Suit Gundam is it does have enough of that Saturday morning cartoon roots that you will see as we go on, that they're always, like, every episode, sometimes I kind of stretch it a little bit, but basically every episode needs to have a scene where the Gundam fights something, and so that's part of, like, the structure of the show. So this is our first Gundam fight, and this is another area where the first time I watched it, I was so impressed by how well this show puts its foot down as in the first episode of establishing this is the kind of show this is the process Amuro goes through of one that, like, the only reason Amuro is able to survive at all in these first 2 episodes is just that the Gundam is so powerful, and everyone that comes up against them in their Zakutus is just like what the fuck? I just shot that thing like 15. It feels like you're like playing an online shooter with lag or something. It's like, oh motherfucker, I shot him like 50 times in the head. How is he not dead? Like, that's basically where they are.
It's the only time Char gets rattled at all in these 2 episodes. Yeah. Is he like blows away that Gundam, he thinks, and then it's around and he's like, retreat, shit.
It's like, I can't compete with that firepower. Yeah, he just, like, gets out of there. So you know, Amuro doesn't have any idea what he's doing. He doesn't even know how to pull out his beam saber yet. Like, and I love as he's getting the Gundam, like, just kind of trying to hobble off of that trailer. I love that the sort of idiot Zeon dude who started the attack just like, oh, it looks like it's malfunctioning or something. Like, it's not working properly. And I love that they do such a good job in Gundam of always keeping in mind that, like, these are 2 people piloting machines fighting each other, so he can't see anything about who the fuck is the person piloting this other. He doesn't know that it's some kid. He doesn't know that it's someone that doesn't know what they're doing, so he just assumes, oh, there's something wrong. It's some prototype. It's not all the way done. And then the Gundam gets up. It's a great iconic shot of the Gundam leaning up and, like, the smoke just coming out of this, like, the vents on the front. It stands up, and then Amuro, like, the first thing Amuro does is, like, he's just like, oh, and he just kind of shoves the Zaku and, like, rips off its weird, like, mouth thing. Then he finally figures out how to pull out the beam saber, and he slashes the Zaku, but he hits its, like, reactor, and so the Zaku fucking explodes. And I don't know if you caught this, Jonathan, but when the Zaku explodes, so it obviously rips that hole in the side of the space colony, and then Amuro's dad and the other engineer are sucked out into space. And it's this quick shot of them getting sucked out along with the tractor that they're riding.
Okay, because I was going to ask, is his dad dead?
His dad, I will just say, like, his dad does come back way later. I think it'll be in our 3rd episode we'll see him again. But let's say he has been affected by the experiences. Okay. But Amuro doesn't know. Nobody knows what happened to Tamray.
Right, because I missed it too. Because it must have happened so fast, and there's so many characters.
It's very quick.
Yeah, he wasn't around. I noticed that. His absence is quite conspicuous. But yeah, I just assumed, I didn't know what had happened to him. It sounds like we're going to learn.
Yeah, so it comes up. It's going to be like a long time before it comes up again. But yeah, so the first significant action of violence Amuro has, like, that he commits, is blowing up this Zaku. Because, you know, he has no idea what he's doing. He doesn't realize that, oh, if I just, like, totally eviscerate this thing, it's just going to fucking explode. Because the Zaku, like, the mobile suits, I'm pretty sure in this continuity, the mobile suits are using nuclear reactors to power themselves. So it's like, here's this giant fucking explosion. and nobody else notices that his dad is like, they're driving on some tractor, and his dad's like, who the hell is piloting the Gundam? The fucking things explode. He gets sucked out into space, and it's just like a quick 2 shots that happens.
Damn.
Yeah, so that's fucked up. And then Amuro realizes, because there's one more Zaku 2 left that he has to fight, because I think Slender has run away by this point. And so he's like, I need to destroy this Zaku, but I can't just blow it up, or the whole space colony might just rip apart, like all the atmosphere.
I love this part, yes, because he starts reasoning, and then he has this very like strategic thing where he's just going to stab through the cockpit and get the guy. Great shot.
Yeah, and great shot and great moment, but there's something about that, and there's this great lingering shot after Amuro pulls it off and he just like stabs through the cockpit, and it's just this shot that hangs on Amuro's face with like black in the background. Like, it doesn't even look like he's in the cockpit anymore, just like zooming in on his face, because this is something that I love that this show does that a lot of mecha shows sometimes fail to do, is keep in mind that like the violence that is committed is ultimately violence against people. Mm-hmm. So when you blow up one of those fucking things, a person has died. And one of the things that this show does immediately is say, like, no, like, Amuro can't just get away with, I just blew up the machine, I don't have to think about it. He has to do, like, a specific directed attack to kill the pilot of that mobile suit without destroying the mobile suit. He has to kill the person, not the weapon, because the person, that's the problem. That's the person he needs to take out. And that's, again, when I say, like, this episode sort of establishes the fundamental principles of this real robot hard sci-fi version of the mecha genre, and it lays out every single step along the way. That's, to me, like the last important thing it needs to do, is make that connection of that it's not G.I. Joe and the helicopter blows up and you see like the guy with the parachute, fall out or whatever. It's like, no, it's not just about blowing up the weapon. You have to kill the soldier. Like, that's how you win the battle. That's how you're safe.
And that's why it is such an impactful shot, because it's literally a stab to the heart. It's a very precise kill shot, and it is symbolically the heart of the robot, but the heart of the robot is the person. Yeah. So he's killing the person. Yes, I think it's very impactful visual storytelling.
Yeah. So and that's basically where this first episode ends. Amuro defeats that. All that shit. Slender gets away to warn Char. And then at the end of this episode, you get a classic, super iconic line that Char has that all the fan base loves of these is like, no one ever wants to admit the mistakes of their own youth. As he looks over and realizes how much he has underestimated the situation.
Yes. It's a really good first episode.
It's such a good first fucking episode, Jonathan.
It's great. What do you think of the ending song for this series?
I love the ending song, the Amuro Furimukanai. Yeah, I always have to watch all the way through every single episode. I never skip it because it's so good.
It's totally in that tradition. Not all anime do this, of having the very kind of sappy ending song as the complement to the very peppy opening song. And it's a good sappy ending song. Yeah,
but like the lyrics of the song also like are so tragic, because it's all about like, Amuro, like, you're a man, you can't show people your tears. Like, this is basically what the guy's singing about. It's like, God, this is fucked up. That, and then also you have because I love the Gundam narrator for the first show, and there's a sign off at the end of like the next on preview of all these where he says, "Kimi wa ikinobiru koto wa dekiru ka," which is like, will you be able to survive the next episode? It's like,
it's good.
It's very good.
This is also the era where next episode previews aired before credits, not after.
Yes.
That would happen in like the late 90s. Mm-hmm. But I kind of prefer it this way.
Yes, there's something fun about you get the next on, and then you get the sappy Amuro. It's very good. So let's talk about episode 2 then, Jonathan.
The first episode is like something Gundam, and then the second one is Destroy Gundam.
Yeah, it's Gundam Rising, or as Ten Shinhan tells us, Gundam Taichi ni Tatsu, which Captain Bright is the one who always tells us. He yells at us the titles of each episode.
Nice. All right, so yes, now we have Destroy Gundam. And yeah, this is the one where Char comes out onto the battlefield. And it feels like, in some ways, Char is the center of this second episode. if Amuro was the first episode's protagonist or center, this one is all Char motivated, making the decisions. How are we going to fight this thing? Ultimately loses in this episode. But I like that we shift just a little bit, and he's like our centerpiece of this one.
Yeah, because episode 2 really has two jobs that it accomplishes, because it's kind of split in two halves. One half, as you're identifying, is the Char stuff, because Char is a really central character of the show. He's going to be very important for a long time to come. So we get our first sort of look at him as our antagonist. But then also, you don't get much Amuro stuff until the end when he fights Char. Really, most of the other half of the episode is us establishing and getting a look at who is going to be our ensemble that are going to ultimately be the crew of the White Base. So because the Earth Federation wasn't just working on a prototype mobile suit, they were also working on a prototype warship, which we now know as the White Base. And that's where we get... So episode 2 does a lot of work of like kind of place setting where the show goes from here. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the first 2 episodes kind of as a pair, is because after this point is where it gets more like here's this episode and it's totally its own thing, and it's just kind of have normal episodes of Gundam past this point. But yeah, so this episode, a lot of the stuff early on, you get this sense of, everything is fucked. Almost all the adults are dead, and we're just kind of scrambling getting all these kids together. So you have characters like this, because I don't even know if they've said all their names yet, but you have Ryu, who was the one who's the kind of larger guy. He, at the end of the episode, he's the one piloting the core fighter. He's also with the captain of the White Base, like trying to man those guns when they explode and the captain gets injured.
I love the captain in this episode, by the way. Great character.
Yeah, the captain's so good. Is that like he gets injured at the beginning of the episode, and throughout the rest of it, it's just like, no, like we have to trust that Amuro kid because we have no choice, and he's kind of trying to guide everything while he's like slowly dying.
He's slowly dying, and he just keeps getting handed like impossible, shitty decisions, and just trying to like figure out the best path so they can survive another 10 minutes. Yes.
So yeah, you have the captain kind of guiding all of this. We have Fraubo has made her way onto the ship, and you have that really good moment at the beginning of the episode where she's trying to get all these like evacuees onto the White Base, and there's this big explosion, and the Gundam hand comes down and protects her, and that's when Amuro enters the episode at the beginning. But so we have Fraubo, who's Amuro's childhood friend, trying to get everything together. Then you have Hayato is also on the ship. He's like the little looking guy who he was also at the beginning of episode 1 hanging out with Fraubo a little bit. Then you meet Sayla, who she's one of our main characters for this episode as well. She's the blonde woman who her and Fraubo are the ones who go out to look for any other survivors. And when they start to do that, they run into Kai Shiden, who's the sort of like lanky, like shifty looking dude that Sayla just slaps immediately and calls him a coward.
That's a great scene.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Kai is good. And it's just like a really good, like all these characters get like one introduction scene. Obviously like Sayla gets a little bit more because like she has some sort of mysterious relationship with Char. But yeah, so like all those characters, and then of course Bright, who is our 19-year-old guy who's like, I think he's technically, maybe Ryu's probably a little bit older, but other than Ryu, who's a like cadet in training, Bright is the only person there who's like really properly a part of the military, but he's like 19, doesn't really know what he's doing, but he's like, well, I have to take command of like, it's like of all the people here, I'm the only one who has any experience that's not, lying on a bed, like dying, or like, having to like crawl over and like try to show someone how to use the comm panels because they weren't trained to do it, but like I'm almost dead. So that's kind of our main sort of ensemble crew of characters that this episode introduces.
I liked all of them.
Yeah.
I could not tell you most of their names yet, but it has also been like one episode with them.
Yes.
And as you say, many of them maybe don't even have names spoken aloud yet.
Yeah, I don't think anyone says Kai's name in this episode. I don't think anyone says Ryu's name either.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's 2 episodes.
Yeah.
There's 43. There's a lot more time. I will get to know them. They all make very strong first impressions. And again, like at this point, other than I would say Amuro, Char, Fraubo, some of the ones who make really big impressions, it's less about individual characters than it is sort of setting the stage, getting a sense of the scope of this thing, the movement of this thing, and then I assume it'll settle down and we'll get to know people.
Yeah.
But like, this is all about getting us into the action, and it does that very well.
And so the most of the action of the first part of the episode is Sayla and Fraubo driving around trying to find any survivors while Amuro is going to use that super napalm thing to destroy all the...
I love the term super napalm, and that it is also just super napalm.
Yeah, and I don't think super napalm ever comes up again.
Okay.
It's just a very convenient, like, we need to... What are they going to use to destroy the other Gundam parts? Super napalm.
No. Well, they could use some napalm. That's too boring.
Yeah.
Super napalm.
Yeah, because napalm shouldn't be able to destroy the Gundam. The Gundam's super powerful. Okay, we have super napalm. One other thing I want to point out, now that thinking about it, because it was a scene that I really, or not a scene, like a moment I really loved the first time I watched it was near the beginning of the episode, like the hull of the white base gets pierced by something, and one of the officers like goes over to a switch on the wall, pulls a switch, and this like bubbly gel stuff comes out, and because the atmosphere is leaking, it just goes to where the gash is and seals it. So good.
I love it. There's so many little world building and like technical things like that where it feels like someone thought through how they would fix this little situation and made a very kind of nerdy like solution to it that they could draw and put into the episode.
That feels always very plausible.
Yes.
Because I remember the first time I saw that, I just went, how have I never seen, like, how is that not a thing on like Star Trek or something? Like, that just seems like such a smart, like scientific, like engineering kind of way of approaching, well, how do we fix the problem of the atmosphere leaking? Well, let's make this like gel that hardens that will just like, because all the atmosphere is leaking, it just goes to it. We're in 0G, it'll just float.
It's not that far off from the way astronauts in actual like the world fix holes on a space station. Like exactly. It's usually like they have to do it manually, but it's duct tape or foam or something that will harden and like cover that.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. So lots of little good world building details that I'll try to remember to point them out as I see them, because there's Gundam in particular has such a great way of dealing with being in 0G and being in a vacuum, because so much of the shows take place in space, and I love all those details.
Can I also say another scene I really liked?
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's the scene where Sayla meets Char, and Char takes off his head, which is, we have not seen Char's face until this point, or his hair or anything. That's an interesting scene, but there's the moment after that, I think, where I think it's Sayla involved in this, where Amuro comes in the Gundam and like offers his hand, and she has to get in there.
Yeah,
that's
because
a fantastic sequence.
Yeah, they're by the wreckage of some Gundam material. Yeah, so another thing. So I said one thing I love is always when you get the sense of like relative scale of mech stuff, and this scene accomplishes that as well. Another thing I love is anytime they manage to find a way to use the mech in a useful way that has nothing to do with fighting, and it gives you that sense of like it's just this big kind of tool. So yeah, like him having to lower the hand and her getting in it, and him just like having to slowly close the hand is like, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, and like lifting her up. Yeah, like the attention and the fact that the show sort of stops and shows that scene instead of just kind of cutting past it is another way to kind of ground all the technology in something more like tangible.
And it's character building for Amuro, I think.
Yeah.
That it's a very like thoughtful thing he's doing, where like the mech is not driving him power mad, you know?
Yeah. And I love it because it's also one thing I love about this episode is how like polite everybody is to one another, in that very Japanese way of like Amuro's using very polite language. It's one of the things that when Kai shows up and he's just like talking like this like thug, that's the one of the reasons Sayla slaps him is because everybody else is like being very respectful and like, we have to take care of the situation, we're going to get through this together, and he's like hey man, what's up guys, and it's like, fuck off, like why would you be so disrespectful? I'm just going to slap you, motherfucker.
We do not have time to be assholes right now.
Yeah, it's like, let's get the shit done. So yeah, that's a good moment. Another really good moment sort of in that area is when Frabo is going around and she's on like the speakerphone thing, like, are there anyone here, like come over, like we'll evacuate you, and then she sees her house and like hears some like a fandom like hey Amuro, hey, and like her and Amuro playing around in like her mom's voice, and she sort of starts tearing up, and then she immediately gets back on the megaphone and starts calling for more people.
One of my favorite things in sci-fi stories is when you have capable people doing good work.
Yes.
It's one of the reasons I love Star Trek The Next Generation. It's just a crew of people who are good at their jobs, and you watch them be good at their jobs. And this is also, I'm like, I already can tell these people are good at what they do. They're not fucking around. That's why they hit that dude.
Yes.
It's like, we're going to be competent here. I like it.
Yes, it's very good. So yeah, I think that's most of the stuff to talk about, the like kind of the good guys side of the episode. So let's talk about my boy, because we kind of talked around him a little bit. Let's talk about Char Aznable, the Red Comet himself.
I don't have a ton to say about Char yet, because you can already tell this is a character who is going to blossom in a million different directions.
Yeah.
Both because you've told me that, and also just I feel like, obviously, duh. Yeah. It's like meeting Darth Vader or something. Uh-huh. It's like, there's more to this guy than meets the eye. But what meets the eye is really fucking cool, because that character design and that weird little winged hat he wears, and those like, it's like a fucking like little Batman mask he's got on.
Yeah.
And the voice is Yeah, it's a good character.
Yeah, the Shuichi Ikeda, who's the voice of Char, it's one of my favorite, just most favorite vocal performances in anything. It's so, and like, and he's not even like fully come into it yet in the first show. It's like once he gets a little bit older and he's in the sequels, like, oh my god. But yeah, like every line he just savors every single syllable he gets to say, and it's just you because the thing with Char is that he is like the part of the core of the character is this sort of like mystery of like, who the fuck is this guy? Like why is he standing around like with this weird helmet and this mask, and like nobody else is dressed the way that he's dressed. I love that like everything he has to be red for whatever reason. So he's got a red fucking spacesuit. When you meet his custom Zaku, his Zaku's painted red. But yeah, he just has this like mysterious, really like charismatic presence to him, and yeah, I love all the stuff of him infiltrating the colony, and he's taking pictures, and he has this mysterious encounter with Sayla where he's like, oh, he looks like her, but it couldn't be. Artesia's not that strong. And it's like, what the fuck are these people talking about? I have no idea. Obviously, we'll find out what's going on.
It's the kind of thing that makes me want to watch more, though, because it's a really good setup that, again, it doesn't feel like the episode is stopping to tease you.
Yeah, no, it's setting up a little like a nice bigger subplot that we'll obviously pick up on as we go through the series.
And Char, correct me if I'm wrong, he's not the ultimate like leader of this group, right?
No, so you do get one. I think it's in this episode you get the scene where he calls Dozel Zabi. So the Principality of Zeon is controlled by the Zabi family. There's a number of different characters. We'll meet one of them, Garma. There's a lot of stuff with Garma next in the next bunch of episodes. But Dozel, Admiral Dozel, sort of is Char's commanding officer. He's the big guy that Char calls to get resupplies. So yeah, so Char he's a lieutenant commander, I think is his rank. So he's like controlling the ship, and he's an ace pilot. But he is not like one of like the leading figures of Zeon. He's just like this really capable soldier that's in command of his own ship.
Which I like. I like that positioning for him. You mentioned the resupply scene. That is one of the best for just like building Char's personality. Yeah. That whole scene where he orders the resupplies. The commanding officer is kind of shocked at how much he's calling for, and Char really doesn't give an inch. And then he hangs up the phone and is like, all right, we're going to go attack. And they're like, what? You just ordered all these supplies. Like, we don't have time to wait for that shit.
Yeah, he's like, Lieutenant Slender, you escaped from that space colony, correct? And it's like, yes, sir. Well, then, shouldn't we be able to do the direct opposite? And he smiles, and it's like, fucking, I love you, Char. You're so good. And then you grab your fucking red spacesuit. But
really, I mean, again, economic storytelling, the on the phone with command, seeing how he integrates all that, very practical thinker, but then it's like, but yeah, we're going to go attack right now because we can. And, it really is a good showcase for that personality.
Yes. And so he goes in, he gets all those pictures. I love the scene where Amuro and Sayla are going up into the White Base's hangar, and the door opens up. So Char just like slips through with his jetpack, and he's just this like little like sleazy motherfucker just flying through everyone. I love like Captain Bright gets I guess he's not captain yet, but Bright gets the call, and he's like there's a Zeon soldier is like in the hangar, like everybody grab guns, we have to take that dude out. So you just get the shot of like everybody grabbing a fucking rifle and getting on the deck of the ship and just trying to shoot this dude as he's flying through. They end up destroying his camera, so Char can't get the proof of all the stuff that he's seen on back to base. But yeah, then they all go out into open space to fly back to their ship. And then you get that great moment where Amuro goes out in the Gundam, he gets the beam rifle. You also get all the stuff here of where Bright realizes that the person in the Gundam is a kid, and it's just like, what? Okay, I guess he's the only person that can do it, so I guess we'll just let you do it. But this is messed up.
Again, it's those moment-to-moment decisions of like, no one's saying you're going to be in that thing forever, but we've got something happening right now. Literally, no one else can do it. It's very tense.
Yeah, so go grab a beam rifle and get out there, and then Amuro's trying to aim with the beam rifle, but he can't shoot it, and it's like that great like his aim is wavering and he's breathing really heavy, and again like flop sweaty Amuro in the cockpit, and then this nice like overlay of a close-up on his sweaty face with the image of Char like floating away in space as he's trying to aim at him, and you realize like Amuro can't just he can take out the cockpit of Zaku, but he can't just shoot like a person that's just a like unarmed person out in space.
Also assuming that beam rifle there would be nothing left of the person.
It would just completely vaporize them, yeah. So he just starts firing wildly, and this is another good bit of characterization with Char where he stops and is like, no, man, don't move. Like, humans are a small target. They're not that easy to hit. And
so good.
The confidence of Char and everything he does is so good. And this is then where you get the big fight scene where Char comes out with the Zaku, his custom red Zaku. You get that great moment where the two guys who are like up in like the crow's nest or whatever it is, and the control room of the white base like are reading the radar or whatever, and they say, oh, that we have something approaching. This can't be. It's moving 3 times as fast as a Zaku. And that's where I think it's the captain of the ship who's like on his like, you know, sick bed is like, oh, that means it's the Red Comet Char. And Bride's like, what? The Red Comet Char? And then it does that great anime thing where like the colors wash out and come like negative or whatever. And it's like everyone's like, it's the Red Comet. And you just get this immediate sense of, oh, this, like, because this is like the character is based on like vaguely like the Red Baron from World War I, of like everybody knows who this guy is. He took out like 5 capital ships at the Battle of Loom. Oh my God, it's the Red Comet Char. Amuro, get the fuck back here. You can't fight this guy. But yeah, so then Amuro and Char have their brief duel in space. And Char has Amuro completely outclassed, except for Char just can't do anything to him. Like he hits the Gundam multiple times, and the Gundam is completely unfazed. And I love that sense of Char slowly realizing, this is ridiculous. Like, how are we supposed to be able to take this thing out? Like, it doesn't matter how good a pilot you are. This Gundam thing is just too powerful.
It's really interesting to me. There is, in a lot of the scholarship I've done on Hayao Miyazaki, he has a quote from, it would be the early 80s, so it would be a few years after Gundam, but like in the time where like mecha anime is very big.
Yeah.
And he has this quote about how much he hates mecha anime because Hayao Miyazaki is an infamous grump.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's talking about, I will have to read it. I do not have the book with me. It's at my apartment in Iowa, so when I'm back next week, I'll read it on next week's episode. But he says, and I assume he's talking more about the super robot kind of mecha anime, because what he's talking about is this. He hates that, like, these kids just get these robots that they didn't even build, and now they're superheroes. He says, that doesn't show kids show having any effort. The best kind of mecha would be if he has to build it on his own and learn how to use it on his own, and then he achieved something. It's such a Hayao Miyazaki quote. That's not exactly what Gundam is doing, but I do find it interesting that it's not falling into the trap Miyazaki is laying out there, because it is like Amuro, like it's very conscious of the fact that Amuro is being protected by this robot, and it's not his own skills saving him yet.
Yeah.
And if he's going to become a real hero in this situation, he's going to have to work for it. And I assume that's going to be much of the arc of the series.
Yeah, that's a big part of his character arc, is coming to understand how to be skillful in his own right and not just have to rely on the power of the machine.
So it definitely made me think of that while watching this, because it's totally questioning those tropes.
Yes.
And it's because, again, the first big confrontation between hero and villain is the villain totally kicks his ass, except for the fact that his dad built a really strong robot.
Yeah, like Char, like if Char just had a weapon that was worth a damn against the Gundam, he would have won that fight in like 3 fucking seconds.
Yes.
Because Amuro's just like firing wildly, and he has no idea. He's just like, oh god, this is what a battle's like. Oh shit! And Char's just completely outmaneuvering him, but he does get off that one shot with the beam rifle that takes out Slender. Rest in peace, Slender. He made 2 whole episodes.
Amuro has killed 3 people at this point.
Amuro has already killed 3 people, and yeah, the one shot with the beam rifle completely vaporizes that fucking Zaku, and I love that, like, everyone's just like, Ishigeki Day, just like, in one shot, oh my god, like, one shot, and that's where Char, there's this great little, like, sort of dramatic irony there of that was actually the last shot, because Amuro had been firing so wildly, despite Bright warning him, like, don't just fire like crazy, like, you'll run out of energy. Amuro does run out of energy. He fires his last shot. That one happens to get Slender, but Char obviously doesn't. Again, this like sense of like the importance of information in war is so big in Gundam. It's like he has no idea of that, so he just falls back immediately, not realizing that the Gundam can't really do anything to him anymore, because he's just like, no one can deal with that level of firepower. That's a like battle class level, fucking battleship level beam cannon on a fucking mobile suit. We need to regroup and refigure this shit out. That whole sequence, just the editing of the fight, like, I think it's true of all of Mobile Suit Gundam, is just the sense of direction and editing is so strong that they don't have any filler stuff in the fights. There's no just like there's like a punch that misses, like every single attack feels meaningful and purposeful from like a storytelling perspective, even if obviously like Amuro's attacks are not purposeful in the sense that he knows what he's doing, but the sequence feels choreographed in this very intelligent way. That's really effective.
And you can feel them working a little bit with the limits of animation and budget.
Yeah.
but it's a very effective use of it in that it's a couple of moves. It's not this like super fast fluid thing you would get with digital animation today, but everything has impact. They're putting their money where their mouth is on this. Of like, if we're going to do a move, we're going to make it count, and it makes it very, for me at least, engaging to watch.
Yeah, you just don't have any sort of wasted time in the battles. Everything feels like it's being done purposefully, which is great. So then you have the end of the episode where Amuro comes back to the white base, and I love this ending where he comes back on board. Bright has basically taken command because I think the captain is actually passed out at this point, and Bright just comes up to him, and Bright's like, "You rely too much on the machine." And Amuro's like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like, if you're the only person who can do this, if you're going to do it, you're going to need to learn to do it well." And Amuro's like, "I can't promise to do anything. Like, I will do my best, but I can." And it's just like this. It sets up the character arc and the dynamic between Bright and Amuro, where, you know, I've obviously said it multiple times now, where Bright becomes the captain of the ship at some point. Amuro is the lead pilot. That there's this tension between the two of them where Amuro did not fucking, like Bright's a part of the military. Amuro's not a soldier. He didn't sign up for this shit. And so that tension of Bright needs Amuro to do what Bright needs him to do, but Amuro does not want to be a soldier. He does not want to go out fighting. He doesn't want to go out killing people, but he's the only one who knows how to use the Gundam at this point. So he has to do it. And I love the way that last scene and that tension between the two of them, how that sets up like what are like big character arcs and story arcs that we will see as we move on to the subsequent episodes.
Awesome. So that's probably it for this week.
Yeah.
It's a good start.
Gundam's real fucking good.
It is. I'm excited to watch more. Next time on this bonus podcast, Weekly Suit Gundam.
Yes, Weekly Suit Gundam.
We will be talking through episode what, Sean?
So we'll be doing episodes 3 through 13. So we'll have so we're heading towards Luna 2, which is a big mining asteroid that's in the orbit of the moon. And then eventually we'll meet Garma Zabi, and that's sort of what this arc will be about. And just for people looking ahead, so we'll be doing episodes 3 to 13 for the next episode. The one after that will be episodes 14 through 25. The one after that will be 26 through 38. And then our final episode, where we'll do the last 5 episodes, 39 through 43, and then we'll also do like wrap-up stuff, look back on the whole series and talk about it for that one. But yeah. So it'll be 5 episodes in total, including this one.
The plan roughly is that we'll put them out bi-weekly, but if we're going faster than that, they might come out faster than that. It'll be done by the end of the summer.
Yeah, it mostly depends on the pace that you watch them by, Jonathan.
Because I might just binge a lot and then hit like 13 and be like, fuck, I want to watch more. Let's podcast, Sean.
If you want to do that, we can do that. Because I will probably not rewatch every single episode because I just watched them again very recently. I'll just like pick the best ones and watch through those. I'm very excited to talk about episode 13 because that one is especially good.
Nice, and I'm excited to do this project. I think it's a fun. This is a good summer tradition. I think we're starting like did Doctor Who stuff last year. We can do this. I think we've got a good title in Weekly Suit Gundam.
Weekly Suit Gundam. Yeah, and who knows? Like you said, if this is something we want, we could do this forever. If we need to, just turns out there's a lot of Gundam. There's a lot of Gundam out there.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Will you be able to survive?